The smell of Mom's pot roast filled the dining room that Sunday evening in March, but the familiar comfort couldn't mask the tension that always seemed to follow me into family gatherings. At 29, I had learned to expect these moments, though they never stopped stinging quite as much as I pretended they didn't. "So, Sarah," Jake said, cutting into his meat with the precision of someone who enjoyed being the center of attention, "still working at that warehouse downtown?" His tone carried that particular mix of pity and superiority that had become his signature over the years. I nodded, taking a small bite of potatoes. "Henderson Medical Supply, yes." "Medical supply," he repeated, sharing a meaningful glance with our parents. "I suppose that's as close to medicine as you'll ever get, right?" Dad chuckled, the sound low and dismissive. "Well, at least she's in the medical field somehow. Even if it's just moving boxes around." The familiar knot formed in my stomach, but I kept my expression neutral. These dinner conversations had followed the same pattern for the past 5 years, ever since I'd quietly left my pre-med program at State University. The family had their version of what happened, that I couldn't handle the coursework, that I'd failed organic chemistry, that I'd finally accepted my limitations and found something more appropriate for my capabilities. They didn't know about the full scholarship to Johns Hopkins that had come through 2 weeks after I'd supposedly dropped out. They didn't know about the accelerated MD program I'd completed in 3 years instead of 4, or about the cardiothoracic surgery residency that had nearly killed me with its intensity. They certainly didn't know about the fellowship in interventional cardiology that had led to my current position. "You know what I think?" Jake continued, warming to his favorite topic. "Sarah finally realized that medicine requires real intelligence. Not everyone can handle the pressure of actually being responsible for people's lives." Mom reached over and patted my hand in what she probably thought was a comforting gesture. "There's no shame in finding work that suits your abilities, honey. The warehouse job seems steady and that's what matters. Plus," Jake added with that grin that had always meant trouble, "failed pre-meds make great medical supply workers. At least you understand some of the terminology, right? Even if you couldn't actually cut it in med school." I set down my fork and looked at him directly. "You're right. I do understand the terminology. See? That's the positive attitude we like to hear," Dad said, raising his beer bottle in a mock toast. "Accepting reality and making the best of it. That's maturity." Jake leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying himself. "Remember when you used to talk about becoming a surgeon? God, that was hilarious. You probably would have fainted at the first sight of blood." "Jake," Mom chided gently, but she was smiling. "Don't tease your sister too much. She's found her place." "I'm not teasing," Jake protested. "I'm proud of her for finally being realistic about her limitations. Not everyone can handle real medicine. Surgery especially, that takes nerves of steel and lightning-fast decision-making. Some people just aren't built for that kind of pressure." I nodded slowly, cutting another piece of pot roast. "You're absolutely right about the pressure." "Exactly." Jake's eyes lit up with the enthusiasm of someone who thought they'd won an argument. "And the hours. Surgeons work crazy schedules. Emergency calls at all hours. Life and death decisions every single day. It's not for everyone. The hours can be challenging," I agreed. Dad leaned forward, apparently feeling left out of Jake's lecture. "And the education requirements are insane. 8 years minimum just to get started, then residency, fellowships. The smartest people I know struggled with that workload. No shame in admitting when something's beyond your capabilities. Plus the malpractice insurance alone," Jake continued, clearly on a roll now. "Do you know how much cardiac surgeons pay in malpractice premiums? Hundreds of thousands a year. The liability when you're literally holding someone's heart in your hands. It's enormous." I took a sip of water, noticing how Jake's voice had taken on that lecturing tone he'd perfected since finishing his MBA 2 years ago. His job at the regional bank had given him just enough success to fuel his superiority complex, though he'd never quite managed to make it to the executive level he'd always assumed would come easily. "And the training," Mom added, apparently not wanting to be excluded from the discussion of my limitations. "Medical residency is like boot camp from what I've heard. 36-hour shifts, being screamed at by attending physicians. You were always so sensitive, Sarah. That kind of environment would have eaten you alive. Probably for the best that you figured it out before you got in too deep," Jake said with what I'm sure he thought was kindness. "Better to quit early than fail out spectacularly later." I finished the last bite of my dinner and set down my silverware. "You're all very thoughtful to be so concerned about the challenges of medical training. We just want you to be happy," Dad said, and I could hear the genuine warmth in his voice beneath the condescension. Sometimes the best thing we can do for the people we love is help them see reality clearly. Jake raised his beer bottle again. To Sarah for finally finding work that suits her abilities. No more pretending to be something she's not. Mom and Dad raised their glasses to join the toast, all three of them beaming at me with the particular satisfaction that came from successfully managing a difficult family member's expectations. I raised my water glass and smiled back. To finding where you belong, I said simply. After dinner, Jake helped me clear the table while Mom and Dad settled into the living room to argue about what to watch on television. As we loaded the dishwasher, Jake's tone shifted to something more personally concerned. You know, Sarah, I've been thinking. You're 29 now and you seem to have finally gotten your head on straight about this whole career thing. Maybe it's time to start thinking about other goals. I handed him the last of the dinner plates. Such as dating, marriage, kids. You know, normal life stuff. You spent so many years chasing this impossible dream of being a doctor that you missed out on a lot of normal experiences. I leaned against the counter, genuinely curious about where this was going. You think I should focus on finding a husband? I think you should focus on building a realistic life, Jake said, warming to his theme. Find a nice guy who works with his hands, maybe. Someone who won't make you feel bad about the warehouse job. Start a family. Give Mom and Dad some grandkids. That's very traditional of you. Traditional works, Jake said firmly. Look at me and Jennifer. 2 years married, nice house in Riverside Estates, talking about kids next year. I make good money at the bank, she's got her teaching job. Steady, predictable, happy. I nodded thoughtfully. And you think that kind of stability would be good for me? I think it would be perfect for you. No more stress about careers you can't handle, no more disappointment when things don't work out. Just simple, honest living with someone who accepts you as you are. Jake finished loading the dishwasher and straightened up, clearly pleased with himself for having this heart-to-heart with his younger sister. Actually, I know a guy who might be perfect for you. Mike Thompson works construction with Jennifer's brother. Nice guy, steady work, doesn't have unrealistic expectations. Unrealistic expectations, I repeated. You know what I mean. He wouldn't expect you to be some high-powered career woman or anything like that. He'd appreciate having a wife who understands the value of honest work. I smiled at my brother, this man who thought he understood my life so completely, who had built his entire sense of self on being the successful one in the family, the one who had lived up to expectations while his sister had learned to accept her limitations. I'll think about it, I said. Good. Jake clapped me on the shoulder with the enthusiasm of someone who thought they'd just solved a major problem. I'll talk to Jennifer about setting something up. Maybe dinner next weekend, something casual. We joined our parents in the living room, where the eternal remote control battle had been decided in favor of Dad's History Channel documentary about World War II aircraft carriers. I settled into the corner of the couch and half listened to the narrator explaining the engineering challenges of naval aviation while Jake regaled our parents with his plans to fix my love life. Sarah's finally ready to start thinking about settling down, he announced as if he were delivering particularly good news. I'm going to introduce her to Mike Thompson. Oh, that's wonderful. Mom clasped her hands together with delight. I was starting to worry that you'd never get interested in dating, Sarah. You always seemed so focused on those impossible career goals. Dad nodded approvingly. Thompson's a good name. Solid family probably. Construction work is honest work too. Nothing wrong with a man who works with his hands. Plus, Jake added with obvious satisfaction, Mike won't have any unrealistic expectations about what kind of wife he's getting. He knows Sarah works at the warehouse and he's fine with that. No pretensions. I listened to my family plan my future with Mike Thompson, this man I'd never met who apparently had the singular virtue of not expecting too much from me. They spoke with the confident authority of people who had finally gotten their problematic family member's life sorted out, and I found myself feeling almost fond of their certainty. The evening wound down with more discussion of Mike Thompson's virtues and Jake's generous offer to arrange our first meeting. I hugged everyone goodbye and promised to give serious thought to this new direction for my life. Jake walked me to my car, still full of big brother advice about the importance of keeping an open mind and not letting past disappointments prevent me from embracing a more realistic future. The thing is, he said as I unlocked my car door, you spent so many years trying to be something you're not that you forgot how to just be yourself. Mike will help you remember that there's nothing wrong with being ordinary. I thanked him for his concern and drove home to my small apartment across town, where I had a stack of medical journals waiting on my coffee table and a presentation to finish for Monday morning's department meeting. 3 months seemed like a reasonable amount of time for my family to fully settle into their comfortable assumptions about my life and my future with Mike Thompson. 3 months and 2 days later, I was reviewing patient charts in my office at Metropolitan Hospital when my pager went off with a code that made my blood pressure spike immediately. Emergency cardiac event, incoming ambulance, patient identification Jacob Morrison, age 31. Jake Morrison. My brother Jake. I was already moving toward the elevator when my phone rang. Jennifer's voice was high and panicked, barely coherent through her tears. Sarah, oh God Sarah, something's wrong with Jake. He just collapsed at work, they said his heart, they're taking him to Metropolitan, can you meet us there please, I don't know what to do. Jennifer, I said calmly, stepping into the elevator and hitting the button for the emergency department. I'm already here. What exactly did the paramedics tell you? They said it might be a heart attack, but he's only 31, Sarah, how can he be having a heart attack and they're doing CPR in the ambulance and... The elevator doors opened onto controlled chaos. I could see the ambulance bay doors sliding open, the EMT team wheeling in a gurney with a familiar form lying motionless under a white sheet, monitors beeping for bags swinging, Jennifer running alongside crying and asking questions no one had time to answer. Ma'am, you can't go back there, a nurse said, gently catching Jennifer's arm as the trauma team took over, but she was looking at me, recognition dawning in her eyes. Dr. Morrison, are you? Family member, I said quietly. Jake Morrison is my brother. The trauma bay erupted into the controlled ballet of emergency medicine, voices calling out numbers and medication orders while Jake's body disappeared behind a curtain of scrubs and equipment. I stood at the edge of the chaos, watching the monitors, listening to the conversations, automatically translating the medical shorthand into terms Jennifer wouldn't understand. Massive anterior wall myocardial infarction. Complete LAD occlusion. Cardiogenic shock. VFib arrest. In layman's terms, a major heart attack caused by a completely blocked artery, his heart unable to pump effectively, his heart rhythm gone chaotic and deadly. Dr. Morrison? Dr. Patricia Chin, the emergency department attending, appeared at my elbow. I'm sorry about your brother. We've got him stabilized for now, but he's going to need immediate cardiac catheterization and probably emergency bypass surgery. This is a big one. I nodded, still watching the monitors. Cath lab available? Dr. Rodriguez is scrubbing in now, but honestly this is beyond interventional cardiology. He's going to need open heart surgery and he's going to need it fast. His ejection fraction is down to 15%. Jennifer grabbed my arm, her fingernails digging into my skin. Sarah, what are they saying? Is he going to be okay? Why won't anyone tell me what's happening? I looked down at my sister-in-law, this woman who had been planning to help my brother fix my disappointing life just 3 months ago, and felt the familiar calm that always descended on me in these moments. Someone needed to be strong and someone needed to make the critical decisions that would determine whether Jake lived or died. Jennifer, I said gently, Jake has had a serious heart attack. They're going to do everything they can, but he needs surgery. Surgery. Her voice cracked on the word. What kind of surgery? Dr. Chin looked between us, clearly uncertain about how much medical detail to share with the family. We're looking at emergency cardiac bypass surgery. But I have to be honest with you, cases like this, the timing is critical. Every minute counts. Where's the cardiac surgeon? Jennifer demanded, her panic shifting into something more focused. Why aren't they here yet? Dr. Chin glanced at me again, and I could see her making rapid mental calculations about patient confidentiality and family notifications. Dr. Morrison, she said carefully, given the circumstances, would you like to be involved in the treatment decisions? Dr. Morrison? Jennifer's voice went up an octave. Sarah, why is she calling you Dr. Morrison? The trauma bay had gone quieter around us. The initial crisis stabilized enough that Jake could survive the next few minutes, but his condition remained critical. I could hear my parents' voices in the hallway. Someone had called them and they were demanding to see their son, demanding answers from nurses who were trying to explain hospital protocols and visiting restrictions. Jennifer, I said, taking her hands in mine, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Jake is going to need emergency heart surgery, and he's going to need it performed by the most experienced cardiac surgeon available. Do you understand? She nodded frantically. Yes, get the best surgeon, money doesn't matter, insurance will cover it, just save him. The thing is, I continued, The most experienced cardiac surgeon available is me. Jennifer stared at me blankly, her brain clearly struggling to process words that didn't fit with anything she thought she knew about me. I don't understand. I'm Dr. Sarah Morrison, Chief of Cardiothoracic Surgery here at Metropolitan Hospital. I've been Jake's sister and a cardiac surgeon for the past 5 years, and right now, I'm the person most qualified to save his life. The color drained from Jennifer's face as the full implication hit her. Behind us, I could hear my parents arguing with hospital security about visiting hours and family rights, their voices carrying that particular tone of people who expected their emotional distress to override institutional policies. But you work at the warehouse, Jennifer whispered. I own Henderson Medical Supply, I said gently. It's one of the largest medical device distributors on the East Coast. We supply equipment to most of the hospitals in the tri-state area, including this one. Dr. Chen cleared her throat diplomatically. Dr. Morrison, your brother's condition is deteriorating. If we're going to attempt surgical intervention, we need to move now. I squeezed Jennifer's hands once more and then released them. I need to scrub in. The surgery will take approximately 4 to 6 hours, depending on what we find when we open him up. Dr. Chen will keep you updated on our progress. Wait, Jennifer grabbed my arm as I started to turn away. Sir, wait. Are you really? Are you actually going to operate on Jake? I paused, looking back at her. Jennifer, I've performed over 800 cardiac procedures in the past 5 years. Jake is going to receive the same level of care I would give to any patient, which is the highest level of care available anywhere in this region. But he said, Jake always said you were. I know what Jake said. I kept my voice gentle. Right now, what Jake said doesn't matter. What matters is that his left anterior descending artery is completely occluded, his heart muscle is dying, and I have about 20 minutes to get him into an operating room before the damage becomes irreversible. Jennifer nodded numbly, and I left her standing in the trauma bay while I headed toward the surgical suites. As I walked down the hallway, I could hear my parents' voices getting louder as they demanded to know why no one would tell them what was happening to their son. I stopped at the nurse's station and picked up the phone. This is Dr. Morrison. Please have someone escort the Morrison family to the cardiac surgery waiting area and explain that the patient is being prepared for emergency bypass surgery. The surgeon will speak with them after the procedure. Yes, Dr. Morrison. Should we mention that you're the... Just tell them the chief of cardiac surgery is handling the case personally. I hung up and continued toward the surgical suite, where my team was already preparing for what would be one of the most technically challenging operations of my career. Not because of the medical complexity, I'd handled far more difficult cases, but because for the next 5 hours I would need to maintain perfect professional focus while operating on the brother who had spent the last 5 years explaining to everyone why I could never be good enough to do exactly what I was about to do. As I began my surgical scrub, I could hear the familiar sounds of the operating room being prepared. Equipment being checked, monitors being calibrated, the quiet conversations of surgical technicians who had worked with me long enough to know that when I was calm, everyone could be calm. Dr. Morrison? Sarah Kim, my lead surgical nurse, appeared at my shoulder. I heard it's your brother on the table today. Are you sure you want to take this case? Dr. Patterson is available if you'd prefer to have someone else. Thanks, Sarah, but no. This is exactly where I need to be. She nodded, understanding without needing further explanation. Okay then. Let's save your brother's life. I finished my scrub and stepped into the operating room, where Jake lay unconscious on the table, his chest prepped and draped, his life depending entirely on the skills he'd spent years insisting I didn't possess. The anesthesiologist confirmed that he was stable for surgery, the perfusionist verified that the heart-lung machine was ready, and my surgical team took their positions around the table. Scalpel, I said, and began the procedure that would either save Jake's life or prove that everything he'd believed about my capabilities had been tragically wrong. 4.5 hours later, I emerged from the operating room to find my family clustered in the cardiac surgery waiting area, their faces showing the particular exhaustion that comes from hours of helpless worry. Jennifer looked up first, and I could see in her eyes that someone had finally explained to her who I was and what I'd been doing while she thought I was stacking boxes in a warehouse. Sarah. Mom stood up slowly, her voice uncertain. The nurse said you were. Jake came through the surgery beautifully, I said, pulling off my surgical cap and letting them see my face clearly. We were able to perform a triple bypass, restoring blood flow to all the affected areas of his heart. He's stable and his prognosis is excellent. Dad was staring at me with an expression I'd never seen before, something between wonder and recognition, as if he were seeing me clearly for the first time in years. You operated on Jake. I did. You're really a doctor. I'm really a doctor. Chief of cardiothoracic surgery, actually. I have been for the past 3 years. Jennifer started crying again, but these were different tears. Relief mixed with something that might have been embarrassment. Sarah, I'm so sorry. We had no idea. Jake never said, we thought you were. You thought I was exactly what I let you think I was. Mom reached out tentatively as if she weren't sure she was allowed to touch me. Honey, why didn't you tell us? Why did you let us believe? I looked at my family, these people who had spent 5 years explaining my limitations to me, and felt the same calm I'd experienced in the operating room. Because it didn't matter what you believed about my life. It only mattered what was true. But we said such awful things, Dad said, his voice rough with something that might have been shame. We treated you like. You treated me like someone you cared about but didn't understand, I said gently. That's not the worst thing a family can do. Over the next 2 hours, as Jake slowly woke up in the cardiac ICU, the full scope of the misunderstanding gradually became clear. I answered their questions about medical school, about my residency, about how I had managed to complete my training while they thought I was dropping out of college. I explained about Henderson Medical Supply, about my position at the hospital, about the life I had built while they assumed I was learning to accept my limitations. Jake's first words when he was conscious enough to speak were slurred but unmistakable. Did they get the best surgeon? Jennifer took his hand and looked at me before answering. They got the chief of cardiothoracic surgery. Jake's eyes found mine across the ICU bed, and I could see him trying to process what he was seeing through the post-surgical haze of medications and confusion. Sarah. Hi Jake. Welcome back. You operated on me. I did. Triple bypass. You're going to be fine, but you'll need to make some lifestyle changes. We'll talk about that when you're feeling stronger. Jake closed his eyes and I could see him struggling with concepts that didn't fit with anything he thought he knew about me, about medicine, about the way the world worked. When he opened them again, his expression had shifted into something I'd never seen from him before. I'm sorry, he whispered. You don't need to apologize for having a heart attack. No, I'm sorry for what I said. About you not being smart enough. About medicine being too hard. About you being a failure. I squeezed his hand gently. Jake, you said what you believed to be true based on the information you had. That's not something you need to apologize for. But I was wrong. About everything. I looked at my brother, this man who had built his identity around being the successful one in the family, who was now learning that his biggest failure had been assuming he understood what success looked like. You weren't wrong about everything. You were right about the pressure, about the long hours, about the difficulty of making life and death decisions. You were right that it's not for everyone. Jake managed a weak smile. But it was for you. It was for me. Over the following days, as Jake recovered and my family gradually adjusted to the reality of who I actually was, I found myself reflecting on the strange comfort of finally being seen clearly. For 5 years, I had carried the secret of my success like a shield against their assumptions about my failures. Now, watching them struggle to reconcile their image of me with the truth of my life, I realized that both versions had been real. I was the sister who had quietly accepted their limitations and found work that suited her abilities. I was also Dr. Sarah Morrison, chief of cardiothoracic surgery, whose hands had guided Jake's heart back to life when no one else's could have done it. The warehouse worker and the heart surgeon had been the same person all along, and my family's inability to see that said more about the stories we tell ourselves about success and failure than it did about any actual limitations in my life. Jake made a full recovery, returning to work with a new appreciation for his mortality and a significantly improved diet. Jennifer started asking more thoughtful questions about my actual life rather than making assumptions about what my life should look like. My parents began introducing me as their daughter, the doctor, instead of their daughter who worked at the warehouse. And I continued doing exactly what I had been doing all along. Saving lives, running my business, and quietly exceeding every expectation that had ever been placed on me, whether my family knew it or not. Because the thing about being underestimated is that it only matters if you need other people's estimation to know your own worth. And after 5 years of letting my family believe I was less than I was, I had learned that my value as a surgeon, as a business owner, and as a person had never depended on their recognition. It had only ever depended on my willingness to do the work even when no one was watching.